Hello, everybody. Welcome back here to the Spring 2021 West Virginia Cybersecurity and Game Developers Expo. I am Patrick Smith, and here today we have a session with Bill Gardner, who's an assistant professor at Marshall University. He teaches in the cybersecurity or the cyber forensics and security degree programs. He's also the co-author of Building an Information Security Awareness Program, Defending Against Social Engineering Hacks and Technical Threats. So he's definitely going to build on, I think, what Ira Winkler was talking about earlier. He's also a co-author of Google Hacking for Penetration Testers. So thank you so much for coming and talking to us, Mr. Gardner. I'm going to go ahead and hand the presentation over to you and let you get started.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Everyone can see the slides, that sort of thing. I'm kind of watching myself over here on YouTube to make sure everything looks good. I was kind of worried about these slides, but I guess they're okay. So my name is Bill Gardner. I'm an assistant professor here at Marshall University, teach cyber forensics and security. We just changed the name of the program. It used to be called Digital Forensics and Information Assurance. So it's more, I think it's a more accessible thing to do to call it cyber forensics and security. So I've been at Marshall since 2013. And so it's been a while now. So I did write this book, Building an Information Security Awareness Program, which talks about the things I'll talk about today in much more detail. My co-author is Valerie Thomas. Her online hacker handle is Hacktress, and you can follow her on Twitter. I'm Once on Twitter, ONCEE. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on Facebook. I'm on Twitch as the real Once. So feel free to follow me in any of those places. It's my first time using StreamYard, and I have to say I'm impressed with it. As far as Ira goes, Ira spoke at my conference, Secure WV, a couple years ago. Actually spoke last year too. I told him at that time that really, if it wasn't for him, I don't think that I would be in this field. I first saw him speak, I don't know what year it was. Patrick, I believe you were talking about it at one point. Saw him speak in West Virginia Office of Information Technology used to have a cybersecurity day,
I
and
think it was either
that's the first time.
2008 or 2009. But
Okay,
yeah, he spoke with a couple of other individuals, and that's when I first saw him.
yeah. Trying to figure out who else was there. Johnny Long spoke one year, but those have always been good, and I haven't had them for the last few years. But anyway, that's when first time I met Ira, and he really inspired me to get into this field, and really gave me a look at it's not all technical things, because I spent 20 years as a IT administrator. I was director of IT when I left my last job to um, come work at the university. But I was director of IT, but I was also wearing all these other hats. I was basically CISO, I was in charge of physical security, and a lot of other things. So my experience working in industry itself is what shaped this as a network defender, shaped this book. Um, so I think I joked earlier that I should have called this Building Information Awareness Program against IRA, because IRA was out doing all these tests, so you want to stop the people doing the things that he's done in the past as far as testing security. So basically in information security or cybersecurity, I've learned to adopt the term. The very basis of any sort of security program is policies and procedures. So you have to have policies and procedures about what users can and can't do. They have to have some sort of guidelines. Can they shop during work? Can they go on social media during work? What can they do at work? Also, you have to have policies and procedures about remote workers. Um, can they use their personal computer to connect to the corporate network, or are they introducing risk? So you sort of outline that. That's the first thing you do. Second is user awareness training, and that's part of this. That's part of this too. I wrote this book really as sort of a guideline how to actually do this with little or no money. And it's not about your typical user awareness program, which are canned videos. SANS has securing the human. This whole idea of saying some human firewall just drives me insane, makes me roll my eyes. And I've been through a bunch of security awareness trainings, and they all suck. So one of the things we talk about in this book is how to make it part of your culture. So user awareness training is the next thing. The next level up is patch management. Are you patching everything on the technical side? Do you have something that goes through and remediates your patch? If your Active Directory domain controller isn't properly patching the computers on your network, is there something that goes and double checks that? And now also the other thing to remember is you need to patch your applications as well. Case, Dell Case does a good job of this, and there's other products out there as well. Log management, are you reading your logs? Do you have something that aggregates your logs? Do you have a way of, instead of reading each one of the logs that you have, of automatically going through it and pointing out the important stuff, the anomalies? And there's a whole bunch of different stuff that does that. Blue Mirror is one of my favorite products. If you should look at Blue Mirror, maybe in the future after you graduate, or even now in your current environment, it may be useful for you. It's not very expensive. It's sort of like Snort, but way more accessible. You can take all of your logs and basically aggregate them. And in the past, the industry standard was something like Splunk, but Splunk is a big, unwieldy sort of program, and that might work in some environments. But I found Blue Mirror, and this is not a paid advertisement, but I'd look at Blue Mirror if you want to do something with your log management, so that you have some idea of what's important in your environment. Antivirus, you can't run without antivirus. Security appliances, that's all great. We spend a lot of money building these fortresses around our networks. What a corporation holds dear. What makes that organization money? That's what you're trying to protect. So if it's Coca-Cola, it's the secret formula for Coke. If it's a drug company, it's the secret formula for their latest drug, the miracle drug that stops hair loss. Whatever it is. And then finally, metrics. And all these, especially user awareness training, can have an impact on metrics, but you have to build the security program from the bottom up, starting policies and procedures all the way up to metrics. In the end, with metrics, you're trying to figure out what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. So let's take a step back now and let's focus on the human. So again, we spend a lot of money putting in these firewalls and these routers and these IDSs. But in social engineering, all it takes is one person to click a link or to fall prey to a phishing call. And then basically the nefarious actor is behind all this and actually in a client workstation from which they can pivot an attack on everything else in the network. So here's the dictionary definition of what is security awareness and training. This is boring to read, let alone go through. A formal program with the goal of training users potential threats, a lot. So basically it's a program that works on educating people. I already talked this morning about educating people. You can't say everyone's stupid, that maybe they didn't know that was a problem. So part of the security awareness training, or the major goal of security awareness training, is trying to tell people or help people become more secure without being preachy about it, and also not becoming sort of malaise about it, because you get so much of the stuff all the time. Oh, here's another threat, here's another breach. You have to really sort of relate that to the person so it becomes personal. So how does a certain kind of threat affect them personally? And that's what you have to aim for. So why security awareness training? Information in cybersecurity, people are the weakest link. Basically, you can build a lot of technical things that aren't particularly they work really well. They might have bugs, but you can fix the bugs. But how do you patch a human? Um, People, it's not just end users. It's also configuration management. A lot of breaches happen because appliances or OSs or things that are put on networks are misconfigured. They have default passwords. Um, they're not properly configured, so they're supposed to be guarding your data when you're not doing anything. And not all attacks are technical. And we'll talk about no tech, low tech hacking as well. So again, getting budget buy-in, policy development is the first thing to focus on. Policy engagement, policy enforcement. This is usually the HR department. It's not you. So you really have to go to the HR department and the people in your organization at a higher level and say, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is how we do it, block by block. And one thing you talk about is cost savings. Is how is it going to save the organization money, and how are you going to increase production? If I don't constantly have computers offline because I'm having to blow everything away on it and then reinstall it because someone clicked on a link, um, they got a virus or they look like they've been breached, that person can be more productive. Because I was in an environment before I came here where it was basically an entire day of downtime. And I worked at a law firm at the time, and most of my time in the past has been spent at law firms. And you're talking about the billable hour. If people can't bill, they can't make money. Um, so there's money lost if the lawyer's not being productive and can't bill. So um, attacks are targeted. Not all users face the same risk. So people out on the road are different than people who are in the office all the time. And the help desk is one of the biggest, juiciest targets. One of the common vectors when I'm on a penetration testing engagement with social engineering and scope is called the help desk and ask for a password reset, or call somebody if you're using something like social engineering toolkit. You're doing a web attack. You call the help desk and you say, "Hey, I've got this $1 million contract, and I really need to get to this website. Can you go there and see if it works for you?" So they go there and they click a link, and then you compromise their computer. Different encounters, different users encounter different risks. Home users is different than corporate users, but it's all overlaps, mainly because when you think about it, corporations or organizations you work for also have your personally identifiable information. For example, if they have to pay you, so therefore they have to have your bank account number. They have to provide insurance for your dependents, so they know all your kids' names and social security numbers and your spouse's names and social security numbers. So when you think about, oh, it's just their data, I don't really have a dog in this fight. Your information can be breached just as easily, and probably will be, if there's a breach inside the organization. You also have to teach different users have different levels of risk based upon their access to the corporation, um, their access inside the computer network. So you have to really focus your training to them. The training that I would give to a salesperson be different than somebody who never left the office. The training I would give to the CEO, CFO, or managing partner, or somebody who was head at the C level or head of the organization is different than the one I would give to somebody who works in the mailroom. Each face the same sort of cyber risk, but they have different exposures to risk. Also, users are different. Um, and honestly, the more highly educated they are, the harder they are to educate. Um, I'm glad I don't work on the IT desk here at Marshall, because professors are the worst. Professors are pretty bad. I look for lawyers. Lawyers thinks everything's is magical, and doctors are by far the worst because they have a huge ego and they think they know everything. So it's a matter of breaking down those barriers. Also, engaging people at the educational level they have. I went to the journalism school, and we were taught to write a sixth grade reading level because the newspaper is not written at a very high reading level because it's accessible to people. And one of the things you have to do is make it accessible to your users, independent of their educational level. Home users face different risks than corporate users, but during the pandemic, we've had a lot of remote work. So home users have become corporate users because they're working from home using a VPN or some other sort of system to collaborate, and that's introduced much more risk into the corporate environment and also for the home user. So how often do you do this? Usually it's when you get a new employee. Once a year used to be pretty standard. Quarterly is really probably more standard now, but it really needs to be continually. You have to continually almost social engineer your users to be secure. In that, you have to give them information security awareness training without knowing they're getting it. Basically, um, you know, lectures, and I'll talk about this later. Um, the lecture's dead. And I hate to say that as a professor, but that's one of the reasons I don't do a lot of lecturing. I get tired of hearing my own voice. Um, so there's things you can do that are more interactive. Active learning is way more engaging. So there's things you can do with security awareness training that is also active learning, which is not somebody lecturing to them about, don't click on links, don't open attachments. How many times have we heard that? So it has to be engaging. Canned solutions are boring. People spend a lot of money on canned solutions. In-person training is the most effective, which is with pandemics become more of a problem because in-person training is harder to get. Um, but a webinar with a bunch of people is not as effective with a smaller remote access, like a Teams meeting, for example. Um, so as long as it's personalized in some way, that's just more effective. In-person training is the best, and hopefully soon we can get back to normal or what's close to normal, so we can start doing in-person trainings again. You have to personalize that training. If I give a security awareness presentation to CISO of a Marshall University, it's going to be different for the CISO of a manufacturing firm. Different targets. In the case of the manufacturing firm, um, they're trying to steal manufacturing data, or they're trying to inhibit the supply chain. In the case of a university, 100% of the time, what they're trying to get is research data, which can be taken by an actor such as Chinese are really big on intellectual property. What they couldn't build themselves, they basically have taken from U.S. universities and corporations since the early 1990s. There's an operation called Titan Rain, where all this really started. Um, the Chinese would see us with our smart bombs during the Gulf War. And they're like, man, we need to do that. We need to steal this. And we saw an ongoing campaign of intrusions, the steal intellectual property that continues up till today. You don't have to spend a lot of money to do a security awareness program. We'll talk about some examples of really low cost, no cost things that you can do. The first thing is you hear from users is nobody wants to steal our data. It's all public anyway. Well, no, it's not really all public anyway. Regulatory. So, you have to explain that you have data on your network, which if it's breached, it's going to cost your organization a lot of money, which impacts you. I mentioned HIPAA and PCI. If you're an educational institution, such as Marshall or Mount West, you fall under FERPA, which is the federal regulation that protects your student data. And there's breach notifications laws, and there's breach notification law in each state. In the book, I look at West Virginia's breach notification law, but they're different in each state. There's a push now to try to make all those congruent by having a federal breach notification law. Basically, what they're trying to do with regulations is try to force people to be secure. So what's the motivation of attackers? The first one is money, of course. Identity theft, credit card, industrial espionage, stealing trade secret, hacktivism. Who's ever heard of Anonymous? Anybody? I was going to hold up my Anonymous book. I don't have an Anonymous mask. I think some student went off with it. So hacktivism's still happening. It may not be calling themselves anonymous, but they're still out there and are very active. And with the rise of social justice issues around the country now, involving police shootings and other sorts of activists who are acting out in the streets, it's not much for them to step online and start doing things like denial of service attacks, website defacements. I know I teach West Virginia Rocks, and that network, which is statewide, it's run by the Higher Education Policy Commission of West Virginia, was under DDoS attack for the last 24 hours. So the question is that is that somebody doing it for the laws, for the laugh, or was it some sort of hacktivist intrusion? Who knows? Cyber warfare, nation state against nation state. You hear a lot about cyber warfare. Now we're sanctioning Russia for the SolarWinds breach. And we have ongoing conflicts around the world. North Korea, they're cyber war actors. Iran, Chinese are very big in cyber warfare, but there's a lot of others out there around the world that you don't usually think of. India and Pakistan's been involved in cyber warfare for the last 20 plus years, since there's been an internet. Website defacements and denial of service attacks are the two main things that they do. Bragging rights, hey, look, I'm a elite hacker. That still happens. People come up through the hacker underground. They don't have good moral compasses, and they're like, hey, look what I can do. I'm an elite hacker. So here's some the cost of data breaches. These are kind of these are just growing every year. It costs more and more money to recover from, to pay the fines of data breaches. And part of this too is when we talk about cost reduction, this has a direct correlation in that if you can reduce or eliminate the cost of breaches, you're saving your organization money. And if you want to look at the current, the most current data, the Poneman Institute or the Ponyman Institute is the place to look. And there's the website address at the bottom. But so some of the threat actors out there, the Russian business network, Chinese hackers, hacktivism, and cyber war, which I think we just already talked about. More specific, from the Russian business network isn't just the Russian government. It's organized crime, and they work closely with the Russian government. Chinese hackers, these could be Chinese soldiers that are trained to hack and work in high-rise building in China, or there are Chinese patriotic hackers who will carry out the orders of the Chinese government. And that also helps deflect attribution to the Chinese government. The same thing happens in Russia. Hacktivism, we talked about anonymous and cyber warfare, which we talked about before, which is nation state against nation state. So the RBN are pretty nasty guys and girls. I'm sure they're a women organization. Commonly abbreviated as the RBN. They're multifaceted. Cybercrime organization. They like to steal identity, credit cards, sell them on the dark web. They also sell people on the dark web, guns, drugs, etc. So they've been around since 2004. There's closely affiliated gangs that work through and with the RBN, but it's all basically organized crime. Chinese hackers, they hack for nationalistic reasons. Some are state sponsored, many are not. Some of their most famous hacks are things like GhostNet, Google hack, and they were one of the first threat actors to get an APT number, which was APT1. APT back in the day meant that's how three-letter organizations talked about threat actors. Now you have APT groups that continue to work, that have a designation, and now it's pretty much common knowledge what each one of these are. You can look them up. It's Ghost Bear in Russia, which is a specific kind of malware they use. So they base it on malware, they base it on origin, country of origin, etc. And a lot of times, what will happen is antivirus security companies will come up with different names for these organizations, um, but APT sort of brings that all together. Say APT1, I don't even know what the highest APT number is anymore. I sort of lost track. So hacktivism, again, website defacements, denial of service attacks. Anonymous is very active right now in South America. Anonymous around in North America has been so disrupted and fractured. There are still hacktivists out there, I'm sure. Most of the ones we know of who took place in LawSec and different uh, operations, including Chinology, Operation Payback, up through the Stratford and HB Gary hack. They all went to jail. But that's been so long ago. It's almost ancient history. Those people are now out of jail. My students talked to Sabu, the leader of LawSec. He doesn't like to be called that anymore. His name's Hector, who's now a legitimate security researcher. We talk to him about once or twice a semester, and he tells them to have a good moral compass. Don't do the things that he did. He also tells them a little bit about getting started in information security. I'm sorry, cybersecurity, if they haven't, or if they want to leg up, what to do. And he talks about working hard and grinding and looking for opportunities. And it's a very good talk. And he's a very charismatic guy. I can understand how people wanted to follow him during the summer of laws. He also explains to them about how some of his hacking was a result of personal issues. But anyway, we won't get into all that. That's it. We can do another topic on that if you want to. So cyber warfare, nation state against nation state sponsored, clearly state sponsored. In 2007, Russia waged cyber war against Estonia because they moved the statue of a Soviet soldier. Um, Estonia wanted to cast off all of its former Soviet ties, so they started getting rid of these Soviet era icons around the country, and the Russians basically took them offline, which is hard for Estonia because they're very connected. Um, they're a very connected nation in that they vote online, they do all their banking online. Everything they basically do was online. So they just basically said, haha, you want to do this? Your real life actions is going to cause, we're going to cause you damage because you move the statue. There's also the case of Georgia. I thought I had a slide on that before the Georgia invasion. There's also the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. You have Ukraine separatists in the eastern part of Ukraine who are aligned with the Russian government, fighting a war against the Ukrainians in the western Ukraine. And there have been cyber warfare attacks in that case. There's one that I documented that I wrote about in a peer-reviewed paper. Anyway, I've done that presentation before. If you're interested, let know. But yeah, they used Fancy Bear malware on mobile phone devices. The Ukrainians were using like an Android app to target their artillery. So the Russians were able to backdoor that app, release it as an update. You got downloaded the phones. So when the artillerymen in the Ukraine started targeting Russian or Eastern separatist targets, uh, they were able to figure out their location and then fire before the Ukrainians could, and it resulted in a large loss of life and a loss of over 9,000 artillery pieces. So here's one targeting lawyers. This one still goes on. This is a scam where they retain a lawyer to collect money that they're owed, and it turns out that the place they're trying to collect the money from actually doesn't exist, and the place that I was trying to get it, in this case, it was somebody in Hong Kong. So what happens is that a bad check is written to the law firm. The law firm cashes that check, takes their fee, and then wires the money to the client. Well, what happens is that in this case, it was a $200,000 cashier's check, is the law firm has now been tricked out of $200,000, and we still see this one going on. And the law firms typically have some of the worst security in the world. It's gotten better over time. It's better than it was when I left private industry to come teach at the university, but it's a mess. There's another one. Here's one where a law firm was targeted, and I think that Cebu was involved in this one. So basically, anonymous attacked lawyers for Marines that are accused of Iraqi massacre. Oh, it was ANASEC. That was also a Cebu production. So they basically attacked the law firm that defended these Marines. Felt there was an injustice, so they defaced the website, stole all their email and published it on, and also their internal documents, put it on Pastebin. So it was a big embarrassment, and I believe that firm to this day doesn't have a website. Spear phishing against PR firms and lawyers, mainly because, um, you know, black hat hackers think that lawyers and PR firms have a lot of money. They dress nice, they have nice offices, etc. So they targeted. There's been ongoing. This is 2009, but it continues now, uh, targeting different sorts of organizations. Here's a law firm that was hacked because the Chinese were trying to derail a potash acquisition worth $40 billion, and this was actually in Canada where all this happened. So, the Chinese were trying to derail this potash merger because they produce potash too, and it would actually lose money for their potash industry. So who's responsible for security? We all are. I can't stand over you. We can't hire a person to stand over you to tell you not to click on things, or that's okay to open. So it's personal responsibility. Personal responsibility with education now. It's the organization has a duty to educate you on what's good and what's bad, what to do, what not to do. But I can't go around slapping people with a ruler every time they click on a phishing email. You just can't do it. But you can educate user, and education is the biggest defense against these sorts of threats. Passwords, Microsoft has some of the worst password um, advice, in my opinion. So 7 characters long, way too short. Shouldn't contain your name, real name. That's still pretty good. Don't use a word you can find in a dictionary. That's still true. There are dictionary attacks. Should be different than the one before. Uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. But in the end, passphrases are more secure than passwords. And I've worked some pretty secure systems with 3-letter agencies, and they use passphrases, and they're usually a lowercase numbers and symbols. But the problem is you make your passwords so complex you can't remember them, which is not security at all. So my advice is that you can write down your passwords, but don't keep it under your keyboard or taped to your monitor. Put it in your wallet. That's where you keep your money and your credit cards. Or quite frankly, in this day and age, you probably should be using a password vault. My favorite is 1Password. So lock your computer when you get up and walk away with it. Not away with it. When you get up and walk away from your computer, if you have to get to the bathroom, you're going to get some coffee, lock your computer. If not, anyone who sets down to your computer, if it's unlocked, has the same access as you do. Now, most organizations, including Marshall University, is locking your computer after a certain period of time of inactivity, which drives me freaking insane because I'll be sitting here doing something, I'll look up, my computer's locked. But, that way you don't have to remember to lock it. But for those of you who don't have environments that already automatically lock your computer, on Windows it's Control-Alt-Delete, the Mac, if I take my cursor down to the lower right hand corner, it locks my computer. So they can sit down and have the same amount of access not only to your corporate data, but also to your personal data. How many people here say passwords in your browser? We all do. So, the first line of defense is to lock your computer if you're away from it. I used to drop this on people's keyboards if their computer was unlocked in my last job. I think I misspelled some words in here too. Anyway, they hated me, but in the end it worked, and they said that they thought it was a very effective campaign. So attachments, just don't open them. Quite frankly, if you don't know where they're from, it's really easy to put malware in a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet. Macros are bad as well. So just don't open attachments if you don't know where they're from. If somebody sent you something, you don't know what it is, contact that person to legitimate the attachment and just delete it if you don't know where it's from. So phishing is basically using email. There's also vishing and smishing. So I get smishing all the time, SMS messages. Oh, your UPS package has been delayed. We need you to click here so we can send it to you. SMS messages, like I never got any, and like in the last year, I've gotten probably 1,000. Be skeptical people that represent themselves as official solution and personal information. So if you get a call from somebody that says they're the IRS or I think the new one's Amazon, just don't give them any personal or financial information. If they get you on the phone, if they're texting you, there's one, there's there's a vector called, I think it's faxing. Basically, you can fish through faxing. You can fax a fish, which I've seen before. Here you won this wonderful free vacation. Just go to this website, click on these links, and we'll give you your free vacation. Validate the legitimacy of the organization by directly accessing the organization's website. For example, if you get an email from BB&T, I guess they're called Trust now, saying there's something wrong with your password, don't click on the link in the email. Actually go to BB&T and see if there's anything wrong, or call them and say, I've got this email. What do I do with it, or is this legitimate? Sorry. Do not provide personal financial information to anyone who solicits it. Just don't give out information is the big thing. And I'll tell you, one of the things that really got me, it was I was involved with a phishing campaign that was a vishing campaign. We were targeting an organization. So basically what we did was we called them up, called up the IT folks, and we're like, okay, hey, I'm from CDW. And we're working on contracts. We're trying to update people's security software. So, what AV are you using? What version of Microsoft Word or Office? Is it OWA? Do you have an on-prem Exchange server? It's all kinds of questions, where by the end of it, we had a list and version of everything being used inside of that network, as well as the number of devices, clients, servers, firewalls, IDS, whatever you want. You basically got handed to us on a silver platter. The problem really is then you get a call from CDW or some salesperson. Are you really on guard that they're not actually a social engineer? So in that case, you probably should say, okay, I'll call you back. What's your number? And try to legitimize the person. Or if you have a salesperson you work with, is to contact them and see what's up. But yeah, we've used that one before. Don't click on that. Don't take a picture of that QR code. It gives a very nasty place. Phishing. So we use Bitly, these short links, and you don't know where that goes. Why are we still clicking them? So not all breaches are a result of technical attacks. They're usually social engineering and technical attacks smushed together. Social Engineering Toolkit by Dave Kennedy is a good example of basically gaining a foothold through social engineering and then turning that into a technical attack. People are a weakest link. And I really recommend, there's a bunch of books out there by social engineers. Kevin Metnick's written a bunch of books called The Art of Deception. And I just realized recently that I have to explain who Kevin Metnick is, because people don't know because they weren't born yet when Kevin Metnick was active. So Kevin um, was the world's most famous and wanted hacker of the 1990s. And he's written a bunch of books about how he broke into places. And he's not particularly technical. And it was all basically just for asking for the information. He would uh, use phone calls, email, faxes, etc. And I've got a copy of Kevin's autobiography. Where is it? It's called Ghost in the Wires. If someone's made off with it, I'm going to be mad. But anyway, um, it's a very good recounting of his stories and the things he did personally, and how not only did he break into a bunch of places, he also hacked the FBI so he could go on the lam for 3 years. So Kevin's a pretty nice guy. He served his time. The thing about Kevin is, he never made money off his hacks. He just was curious about the technology. But he is now also a legitimate security researcher and penetration tester. And I've seen Kevin speak a number of times at DerbyCon. I got to meet him at DerbyCon one time. I actually have a signed copy of his autobiography, which is pretty cool. He did write also, he and Dave Kennedy wrote the foreword to this book. But every time I meet Kevin, he acts like he doesn't know who the hell I am. But I'm not very memorable. No tech hacking, dumpster diving, fun stuff. Or sometimes you can just look in the dumpster and find the stuff and reach it up and take it out. Dumpster diving, confidential information, it can be found in the tracks. Tailgating, following people through locked doors. Shoulder surfing. Now, I'm not that good at this because I don't have good eyesight anymore, but I know people that can shoulder surf across the street without any sort of aid to pick out if it's like a door with a combination lock. You can also, if you can watch people type, you can pick out passwords, for example. It's just a matter of looking over someone's shoulder. There's also Google hacking, and I was I was honored to rewrite Google hacking for penetration tester revision with Johnny Long. It's basically a way of using Google advanced operators in order to find information on Google which should have never been there in the first place. People don't use the robots.txt file, or Google is ignoring the robots.txt file. But there's a lot of things on Google that shouldn't be there. You also can use Google dorks, as they're called, or Google hacking to find vulnerabilities. Peer-to-peer hacking is not as much of an issue as it used to be. In the olden days, we had LimeWire and all kinds of crazy stuff to share music and files. Now that nefarious people can share this, information on the dark web, they've sort of moved off peer-to-peer hacking or peer-to-peer networks. So this is no tech hacking. This is shoulder surfing. This guy took this picture of himself and put it on Facebook. So maybe he needs some security awareness training. Spyware is basically anything that you install that will spy on you. It will turn on your webcam. It will log your keystrokes. And it's still out there. A lot of it now is mobile apps, especially on Android, that will do this. Web attacks, all kinds of these different names: iframe, cross-site scripting, and SQL injection. And sometimes just going to the website's enough in order for a nefarious actor to hook your browser, and then get in to the rest of your operating system. Once they're inside your operating system, we then pivot those attacks to the rest of the network. And here's two examples of attacks that I worked on, um, actually trying to get them fixed. State Bar and also the West Virginia Record. And this is when I worked for lawyers, and so people noticed that they were getting malware when they went to look at the State Bar. And at the West Virginia Record is basically it's a newspaper for lawyers. It's about lawsuits, who's representing who, etc. Well, they were serving this ad. Someone had not really broken in the West Virginia Record. They popped this ad server, and they were serving malware through this ad. So anytime an ad would pop up, a certain ad would pop up, it would serve malware. So they were able to get us. We determined that's what the problem was. They just basically yanked down this ad uh, and went off their lives. The other one's the West Virginia State Bar. Lawyers have to go there in order to figure out the address of other lawyers, basically. So in that case, they had been pwned for a long time, and they would go through, instead of doing real incident response, they would they would run an antivirus scan on the web server, which was Windows. But really, the problem was that the hack happened through like this really old on-patch Linux system that no one even knew was there or had touched. So that's actually the source of the intrusion, and they had access literally for years. So metrics. So we're talking about metrics now, and that pyramid. We're at the top of the pyramid. So metrics are help desk tickets, user questions, and downtime. How many help desk tickets are you getting related to security? What user questions are you getting security? And are there an increase in help desk tickets and user questions and a decrease in downtime? In the end, you're trying to decrease downtime. The problem really is with the first time you teach a security awareness training or start one up, is that users see a hacker behind every rock. They get better as they go along, but it's going to cause more work on the IT team, the help desk in the beginning. So here's my contact information. That's a really silly picture of me by my friend Chris Lett. Let me switch over here. I think the only thing I have is this question slide. Okay, let me go somewhere where I can actually read the questions.
I'll pull it back down here so you can see. Yeah, I sent out a little thing here, so it may take people a little while, but I did send out a thing asking for questions.
Okay.
I will say that when you were talking there, you're talking about locking your computer. One of my students one day was like, you don't have to control delete and click that. There's like a key combination. I was like,
Yeah.
what is it? Tell me. Windows L. So I
Command
just
L,
heard,
yeah, or Windows L.
yeah, yeah. And I was like, fantastic. I can do a one-handed thing and like walk out the door.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, I absolutely love Kevin Mitnick's Art of Intrusion, Art of Detection. I love them both. I often get confused between the two of them. I know one of them explains how like there's a whole chapter on let's intimidate someone to get the information.
Yeah.
Another chapter of let's play the hapless victim. Um, and then the other book talks about all these sweet hacks that people did. I think detection might have been that one because Scott Nicholas and I both talked about the fact that it seemed like in that book, Kevin wasn't allowed to talk about his stuff just yet.
No,
So it's
there
like,
was a
hey,
court
this
order.
other person over here did this. Yeah, this other person did this.
He wasn't able to write about his hacking exploits for a certain number of years. And there are other people who, for similar reasons, they were, what's the guy's name? I can't remember. Scott Paulson, who has a really interesting story, can't write about his exploits because he's forbidden under his court order in the state of California from profiting from his criminal exploits. So um, he went on to write what was it? Kingpin. He wrote a book called Kingpin. That's very good. And so he'll never be able to write about his exploits. For some reason, Kevin, after a certain period of time, was able to write Ghost in the Wires, and it's an excellent book. Um, I told him to make a good movie, and he said it had been sold for TV rights, and then we'll probably never see it again. Um, he made a buck off of selling it for TV rights, and they probably own all of it. But it's an easy read. I used it in one of my graduate classes because it's such an easy read. And you can see sort of real life social engineering going on. And he got away with it for a long, long time. It basically took another hacker, named Sacha Chukamura,
Shimamura, yeah.
the guy that he hacked, that got mad. There's a book about that too called Takedown. I've got a copy of that here too.
Well, there was that semi horrible 2000 New Line Cinema
Oh,
Dimensions film.
it's an awful movie.
It's an awful movie. I often will show it in class to be like, look, the acting's horrible, but there's some social engineering going on here that you actually see. Like when he gets the faxes, when he calls the guy and he like plays to his vanity to be like, man,
Yes, ego.
yeah, his beautiful phone, man. I'd love to be able to see it. And the guy just opens up and is like, sure, man, I'd love to talk to you about it because
Yeah.
no one wants to listen to me talk. So there's some good nuggets that you can pull out of that awful movie.
We actually tried to get Kevin to speak at this, expo in November, but he doesn't do anything without getting paid, I was told.
No, the
He's a
only
rock
time I've
star.
known him to do anything without getting paid, God bless his sweetheart, was he came to DerbyCon because he and Dave Kennedy are friends. And so he was at DerbyCon for a couple of years, but he doesn't even do that anymore. The fact that probably because I freaked him out, because I'm a Kevin Mitnick fanboy. So he'd walk by and be like, he's like, who's that weirdo looking at me like he wants to marry me? But anyway, so I don't think he went the past few years, and then DerbyCon folded up their tent a couple years ago. So yeah, Kevin's about 20K to come speak at your conference.
Well, I talked to his manager, who dubbed himself as the Jerry Maguire of IT.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. So I mean, Kevin, I guess, have a relationship, even though he doesn't remember me, but I've tried a couple of times to get him here for our conferences, and he's always like talk to my manager or whatever. So
I mean, I get it. When you are the world's most famous hacker, there's going to be a demand. You are a rock star. So I didn't take offense. It was a pipe dream. But
that was worth a try.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fantastic videos out there. You were talking like we often show one of them from CBIT, which I think is actually in Germany.
Yeah.
That he does, which is great. You were mentioning earlier when Ira was at the state, Patrick Gray, I believe from Cisco, actually talked
Patrick
at
K.
that one.
Yeah.
I did not get to see the one that Johnny Long talked at because I
That
really
was
like
the
Johnny
next
Long.
year, I think. He
I
was
missed that
next
because I like to show his no tech hacking, which shows a lot of the stuff that you're talking about. It's getting a little old, but it
Yeah,
was still
still works.
really, really good. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, it still works because people aren't paying attention and fixing things. We did get a question here from Carrie Barger asking about she's working with a lot of attorneys. What's the number one thing you've seen a lot of them do that they shouldn't when it comes to cybersecurity?
Where do you start? I mean, not taking security seriously and not investing in security is the biggest thing I have to say about. It's not important to them. They don't see it as it's something that slows them down. Um, and not investing in it's probably the biggest thing, and not having a awareness program, or not having consultants that are particularly security aware. There's a lot of MRSSPs out there you can work with, and they're not any better, quite frankly, because they're just trying to do their job. They're trying to uh, put a product inside your organization that's supposed to work, but you know, you really need somebody to come in and look at your program, the technical and the non-technical part, and try to figure out what the gaps are so you can fix them, and not addressing that simple question. That simple issue is the big issue, I think.
You were talking earlier about locking your computer when you walk away. One of the things that I often try to tell my students about and preach to them is that even though they find UAC to be annoying, it can be a godsend in a lot of ways.
It can be bypassed too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I saw that just the other day.
Yeah.
I think you tweeted that there was that 2-line
Yeah.
PowerShell code that was
We
put
just
out
keep
there.
finding more and more ways to get around UAC.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I tell them was like, don't be logged on as your regular admin account.
Oh yeah.
Create a Clark Kent style account, have your Superman account you can use when you need to. But then that way, if you do get up, if you are absent minded and you step out of the room, somebody that comes up and tries to do something will be prompted for credentials, not for consent. And so it's
Yeah.
not the best line of defense. The best line of defense is to lock your machine. But if suddenly, I don't know, you're having a really bad day and stomach intestinal issues, at least there's some protection you have there on the machine. So the janitor just can't walk in there and be like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to go ahead and start
Oh,
running this.
I've worked in places where that's an issue. The janitor would use the computers at night, and was doing nefarious things on the computers at night. And so that was back in the 90s when things weren't as easy to secure. It was either that, then the users wanted to turn their computers off, which has their own issues. Sometimes they just don't start when you turn them off. But yeah, I've faced that before.
Yeah, and you were talking earlier about the password manager and how many people save their passwords in the cache of the browser. I tell my students, don't worry. When you get older, you will not save your passwords in the browser because if you do, you'll never remember what it is. So I don't ever save it because I need to type it every once in a while so I can remember what all these
Yeah, I
different
know what
passwords
you
are
mean.
I'm
I've got
using.
that problem now.
Yeah.
And that's really where a password manager like 1Password comes through. Uh, but I think I think we all rely upon save this password a little too much, and it's gotten better. It used to be some pretty easy ways of just swiping passwords from Firefox and Chrome. Web security's gotten better over the years, I think, about cookie stealing and that sort of thing. So, but still, you really shouldn't rely on a password manager. And it's okay to write them down. Just don't, you know, paste it to your monitor, put it on your keyboard.
Well, the real secure ones, yeah, you put under the keyboard.
Oh yeah, that's because you need them, right?
Oh,
Then you have
sure.
to decipher what you've written. Is that an ampersand or is that a at symbol?
Yeah, we have, security through obscurity. Patrick and I are both left-handed, so, who can
Yeah, I
read
was just gonna say,
right?
yeah, that's kind of like two-factor authentication because they're not gonna be able to read it. Well, I'm wondering, I wonder your opinion here real fast at the end here about passwords because you hit up on Microsoft's atrociousness wow, atrocious, the badness. Yeah, it's atrocious, and I was trying to make that into like an adverb or something. But so, we had the option to turn on password complexity, but the guy who helped write the NIST guidelines came out and said, you know what, I just breeded a whole bunch of people who are making passwords that are still easy to crack because they're using a zero for their O and they're using an @ sign for their A, so it's still easy. But what I always worry about is if I don't turn password complexity on and I tell people make a good password, they could type captain, like,
Yeah.
Ira's example of Captain Kirk. So it's like, I need to have that turned on. Maybe I can raise it to be like 15 characters, something like that, larger. But I would like them to start doing like what the XKCD comic showed, where it's like find 4 random words. It's like, I think battery, horse, staple, magnet. And then when you do that, your password entropy will be so large, it will be hard for a password guessing thing to do that. So what advice were you telling people in the industry? What advice are you telling people now for how to train your people, but also make sure your people are doing what you've trained them to do?
Well, I mean, password length and password complexity matters, but in the end, the users won't accept it. So the best thing to do is turn on two-factor authentication. And that's how it's been solved, like for a lot of lawyers and doctors and college professors is, well, I can't remember that, or I have the same crappy password from 20 years ago. So just force them to do two-factor authentication. Basically, it texts then it'll send them a text, especially for things like for OWA, but just for the entire infrastructure of the organization. So whether it's a VPN or if it's an application, a web application, it sort of fixes the weak password problem. Although two-factor is also it's defeatable, but it's much harder to defeat. And that's sort of like that whole security and layers thing where you've got, well, we got passwords, now we got two-factor. The other thing you can do is limit the IP addresses to that can address your network. Um, I know when I was in private industry, we basically blocked everybody that wasn't in the United States because we didn't do business with people external to the United States. That's harder to do for larger organizations, but you can lock out certain IP blocks or allow certain whitelist certain IP blocks. So that's another way of looking at that.
Yeah, I'll throw out there that I used to feel like two-factor authentication with the phone felt pretty impenetrable. And then I really had a bit of a reality check that I was unaware of. There was a Reply All podcast episode called The Snapchat Thief, where people wanted to get these really elite names like, I don't know, artist, just the name artist. And they would look online and people had no problem putting their cell phone number online.
Yeah.
And then they would call Verizon and be like, hey, I'm so and so. This is my phone number. I just got a new phone, but I lost my old phone. Can you help me move it over? And they would basically steal that person's phone number, be able to do the two-factor authentication to get back in and reset their password. And I was like, holy crap. So now this telephone number, which I hand out freely to people because of two-factor, I should be way more careful about handing out my telephone number in that case.
Yeah, that's true. The other thing that I have some experience with I still do penetration testing in my free time, which is usually in the summer. Um, is that you have these two-factor systems that basically will pop up a box and you have to click OK. Well, users will just click OK because they just want it out of their way, and it's just something in their way. So when you actually implement two-factor, I think it has to be implemented in a way that is known to be secure, and it's not going to be a hassle for your users, but it's still going to give it an extra layer of authentication. What is it? Something something you have. I don't even remember anymore, but
Something you are.
something you are.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, part of that could be biometrics. I have a MacBook Air that uses biometrics, my fingerprint. We have iPhone that uses my face, which really doesn't work when you're wearing a mask and you're trying to use Apple Pay at Sheets and you have to take your mask down. Um, there's other ways of addressing that. I think we've gotten much further with biometrics. Biometrics has its own issues because if it does become compromised, you can't change your fingerprint and you can't change your face. You can to some extent, but um, that's going down way down the rabbit hole for the purposes of this talk. But those extra layers, however you implement them, are useful.
Sure. I mean, if you want to go tinfoil hat, somebody that wants to break into your phone, if they can point it at your face, whether you're conscious or unconscious, they could get into it. Like in theory, if you're being detained by police or security, they can point your phone at them, and then guess what? They didn't have to ask for you for your password. So,
Well, that's a good thing. That's a good question. I mean, we have the constant debate around here and just generally in the community about privacy. So if you're arrested and you've got Bitcoin and you're not going to give up the password, the only thing the courts can do is throw you in jail to rot. But, this whole idea that some government agency needs a back door, what happens when the back door becomes compromised? So, it's a slippery slope. Um, but, you know, it is what it is in many ways. All we can do is the best we can do. Number one, nothing's 100% secure. You can de you can lower your attack surface and you can try to decrease your risk by doing security in depth, by having an informed user base. I was absolutely correct. You just can't call people stupid. It's not productive. It doesn't get you anywhere. There's also this question about if you've got somebody who's making your organization a lot of money and they fall victim to social engineering, do you fire them? I mean, probably not. You just have to educate them to say this is bad. Don't do this again. But you're not going to kill the cash cow just because of it depends on the infraction. But everyone falls victim to phishing. I've fallen victim to phishing. I mean, and I'm the guy that wrote the stupid book. Because
sure.
they're using urgency, or there's something you want to do, you feel like you need to do it right now. It's hard to set back and think, well, wait a minute, what am I doing here? But that's really the key, is to sit down and have a sort of an internal conversation with yourself. Is this legit? If I click on it, what can I lose? If I don't click on it, what do I lose? And then you have sort of a decision method to say this is legit or not legit. A lot of people don't have that internal conversation, and it leads to breaches.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Gardner. For those of you all out there watching, the three of us, myself, Scott Nicholas, and Mr. Gardner, are going to be talking later today at 3 o'clock, doing a roundtable on cybersecurity and how to get into the field. So we will all be back. But for now, I think it's going to do it for us here. And Scott Nicholas will be back here at 1:30 talking about VPNs, what they can and what they can't do. What Hollywood wants you to think they can do, but what they can actually really do.
or advertisers.
Sure. But thank you so much, Mr. Gardner. We'll be seeing you
You're
here in a
welcome.
little while again.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you all.